Time for markets now, and May's cattle on feed report from the USDA shows Nebraska with 2.5 million cattle in feedlots with more than 1,000 head capacity. That's second in the nation only to Texas. The state trailed only South Dakota in commercial cattle slaughter for April, with the average live weight at more than 1,400 pounds. University of Missouri livestock economist Scott Brown joined me this week to analyze cattle markets, and we started with the latest cattle on feed report.
Yeah, Troy, I think if we look at what we got on in the cattle on feed report last week, again, we're going to ignore the comparison to year-ago levels just because of how down we were a year ago because of COVID-19. But when you look at what we got out of the report this year relative to 2019, we were actually down in terms of cattle placed on feed in April, down around 5%. And so, you know, I want to make sure we talk about there's probably fewer cattle coming. This, I think, is in lockstep with what we've been seeing in terms of slightly fewer cows and slightly smaller calf crops as we've gone the last year and a half or so. And so maybe some better news coming as we get further down the road of less fed cattle supplies trying to hit processing as we get late in 2021 at least.
And Scott, I also want to get your take on pasture conditions. I read this and I thought it was interesting. The percent of pasture rated poor and very poor is the highest since 1995. How much are these conditions playing into the markets, and how should a producer respond?
Yeah, Troy, boy, you ask the question that really worries me for a lot of producers today. And when you look at that poor, very poor, that's been a little on the plus side of 40%, it's the time of year where we need to be growing grass. You know, if you look back over all weeks, there's only 8% of the time that we're north of 40% bad or very bad, and never before has it occurred in a spring month like this. We're starting the growing season. You look at the Dakotas, for example, very tough situation, and you kind of wonder, even with some good rains at this point, I think we've really stunted pastures and hay possibilities. To the plus side of this for a second, I will say when you look at some of the latest data, places like Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, a little bit of Texas has gotten better in terms of some recent rainfall, but we're certainly setting the stage for what could be a tough year. Of course, predicting rain from now until we get through this year is a little tough for us to do, but I'm certainly worried for those producers that are in the midst of the worst of the drought.
And you alluded to this, with less hay and then higher feed costs, it seems like producers just can't catch a break.
It has been tough, and you mentioned two of those reasons. You know, the cost side of the equation is not helping really anyone along the way. If you look at what feed yards are paying for corn right now, one has to be worried about what feeder cattle are going to be worth as we go forward. We have gotten a little bit of break this week in terms of corn costs, but I always say we're a long ways away from that corn crop in the bin at this point, so who knows whether we get some additional run up in corn prices. I think on top of that, you know, we got producers today who also look forward and see these really high beef prices, yet cattle prices they're receiving aren't in lockstep with those higher beef prices. So there's just so many things that are on top of them at the same time. It's tough right now for a lot of cattle producers in the country.
Given where feed prices are, do you expect weights to pull back a little bit, or is that something that we're already seeing?
So we have at least seen cattle weights that are back to where we were a year ago. Now that's still pretty high relative to the previous 5 years. I think if you push some of these $7 corn and above at us for a while, we'll pull weights down as we move forward. I think that's the sure sign of that. And Troy, honestly, that could be a real positive for at least beef prices as we get in later 2021. We could be in a situation where we continue to have fairly tight beef supplies, and if demand stays as strong as it's been, it could look really good for us.
With all the factors that you've discussed, are we seeing herd liquidation at all?
Yeah, so I think we are. You know, we got livestock slaughter out last week as well, and beef cow slaughter year to date's 10% higher than it was in 2020. That tells me that we've got fewer cows out there as we go forward. Now, I think a lot of that, Troy, is related to some of the dry weather that we're seeing. At the same time, when you look at the percentage of heifers that we've got in feed yards, that's also a fairly high number, telling me that producers aren't holding back heifers to put back in the herd. So I think we're going to continue to see a lower herd. For me, exactly how much lower has so much to do with what pasture and rainfall looks like here for the remainder of 2021.
Okay, Scott, Memorial Day a few days away, and I am smelling the grills firing up already. What can we expect in terms of beef demand as we get closer to summer?
Yeah, I think we've seen some pretty strong demand, and I think that will continue. And I really like to talk about, I look at things like loin, so I'll back up and say, choice box beef sitting here about 3 1/4, not surpassing the peak we saw back in the shutdown of 2020, but much higher than we've seen for a period of time. Things like loin prices have just been on a rocket, if you will. I think as we're opening up food service, there's a lot of folks, I always say, folks are ready to get out. They're ready to be beyond COVID-19. And the one thing that I want to go out and have a really good meal. And if I want to have a really good meal, what do I ask for? I want a really good steak. And so I think that loin demand has been really strong as food service comes back on. I think as we get in the grilling season, again, I think consumers are ready to get out and do some things that really we haven't been able to do for a number of months. I think that's all positive for beef demand here for at least the next 3 or 4 months.